Hello and welcome to another session of Karen's Colours. I'm Dr. Karen and these are my colour conversations. In this session, we're going to be looking at the colour brown. Now, I hadn't intended to do this at this stage, but there was something I found on the net that rather intrigued me a few days back, and I decided to do more research into it, and that required me to present to you the colour brown before we get into presenting that particular topic. What I found was an enormous supply of information, most of which I had to discard because it would mean that I would be talking for days in order to give you the full picture of the colour brown. But I need to explain some of it in order to explain to you at a later date what the brown personality is like. And there are an entire list of different colour personalities in one of the playlists on this channel, if you care to look at them. But firstly, I'd like to welcome back those of you who've been watching this series of videos. Thank you very much to my subscribers. I hope you've been enjoying what you have been watching and listening to. And if you're new here, if you've stumbled across this channel by mistake, perhaps you'd like to stay and maybe even join one of my 35 subscribers. You would be more than welcome. So let's get into it. Now, I guess the first thing we need to know is that brown is an extremely complex colour. So let's have a look at the overview of what it is that we'll be talking about today. Firstly, I'll be looking at the features of the colour brown, then brown as a basic colour term. Then we'll look at the history of the colour brown, only briefly though, as well as a brief overview of its cultural uses. And finally, we'll be looking at the effects of brown on a physical, a psychological, and also a linguistic effect. The first thing we notice about the colour brown is that it is relatively common in nature. It's a natural colour, but basically a dark orange. It's fairly elusive in that it has mostly overtones of red, orange and yellow in combination with low luminance or saturation. It covers a wide variety of the visible spectrum, and it only exists as a colour perception in the presence of brighter colour contrasts. For example, if we look at the two orange-brown spots that we have here, they look as though they are in different colours, but in fact they are exactly the same colour. The colour perception is different because of the surrounding grey shade, and that has to do with the luminance and also the saturation. But some people argue that it's not the colour at all. And the reason that this is the case is that we find that brown is an amalgam of complementary colours. For example, red and green are the two most common colours that are considered to be the colours that will create brown. But if we take that same red and green and we add yellow to the red, it becomes orange, and we take that yellow away from the green so that we end up with blue, those two will lead to the colour brown. And similarly, if we take the orange and blue and we take away red from the orange, we end up with yellow. And if we add that red to the orange, we end up with purple, and yellow and purple also create the colour brown. But brown is also an amalgam of the three primary and the three secondary colours. But most interesting of all is that there is no complementary colour to the colour brown. It stands on its own, although if we do compare it with the other colours of those primary and secondary hues, we find that cyan, a colour that doesn't quite exist yet because it's a part of blue, is the closest to an complementary or opposite colour to brown that we can find. When we examine the range of brown, we find reddish, orangish, yellowish, greenish, bluish, and purplish tones added to the brown itself. We also find that brown has a number of different temperatures. We can see browns in the warm to hot ranges and also the cool to cold ranges. So there is quite a variety of this particular colour. Brown as a basic colour term was first recorded in the year 1000. It's an Old English word, brun, which means dark. There are Germanic adjectives from which this was taken, brunos and bruni, which meant both dark colours and a glistening or shining quality, which basically means to burnish something. The current meaning that we have for the colour brown hails from the 14th century. It was mostly derived from food or beverages elsewhere. In Turkey and Greece, the colour brown comes from the words for coffee. Portuguese, Spanish and French take their colour brown from the chestnut. And in Southeast Asia, Malaya and the Philippines, it's chocolate that gives you the word for the colour brown. Japan doesn't have a basic colour term for this particular colour, but charo, which means tea, you'll have to excuse the pronunciation, is the closest thing apart from small phrases that will denote just what that colour means. The earliest use of the colour brown hails from 40,000 years before the Common Era, and umber, a reddish brown or natural brown clay pigment, was what was used to create some of these pictures. This particular substance contains both iron and manganese oxide, which gives it that particular reddish brown colour. Its use in France has been recorded from 17,300 years ago, and many animal paintings were found on the Lecaux cave walls. Its use in Egypt was for female figures, specifically on the walls of tombs, whereas in Greece and Roman culture, it was painted onto vases and amphora. The reddish-brown sepia ink from the cuttlefish was also used, as were walnuts and chestnuts, the fruit and bark of which were also ground into a colour pigment. That was not a very permanent pigment, unfortunately, so very little of it exists today. In the Middle Ages, from the 12th to the mid-15th century, dark brown pigments were hardly ever used. People had a preference for bright colours, but Da Vinci was alone in that era, using sepia for creating most of his sketches. By the late 15th century, in the Renaissance period, the arrival of oil paintings created a need for raw and burnt umber and sienna. This gave naturalistic shading and backgrounds to set off brighter colours. By the 17th and 18th centuries, brown became quite popular, and Rembrandt in particular used a 90% peat and soil mixture, which was able to give him some fairly rich coloured browns. By the 19th and 20th centuries, however, brown became quite popular in fashion and decor, and so has remained that way until today. Nevertheless, brown was used quite ubiquitously throughout history. In ancient Rome, brown clothing was associated with lower-class citizens, and this described people in poor urban areas, and literally the word pulati means those dressed in brown. By the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Franciscan monks wore it as a symbol of humility and poverty, but every social class had to wear specific colours suitable for their station. And so the poor people of the Renaissance period tended to wear browns of various different hues. In modern times, brown still remains a colour that is useful for the military. It was a popular choice for this purpose since approximately the 18th century and was used as camouflage and then later as rank insignia for various members of the armed forces. There was one rather insidious use of brown, and that was for the uniform of the Hitler Youth. This was to emulate the idea that these were healthy and idealistic young people. As well as that, brown has always been a symbol of rustic, natural and simple objects, and these days it is also used quite frequently as the logos for a number of different brands indicating stability, reliability, dependability, and also nurture. In humans, brown is also a rather common colour. For example, it's the most common eye colour worldwide. It's highly pigmented from dark brown, which is almost black, through to a very light, almost amber or hazel irises. And this is because all irises are partially composed of a substance called lipochrome. The second most colour of human hair is also brown. Brown eumelanin is common among Europeans. Black eumelanin is for non-Europeans. Human skin colour also contains some brown, and that brown again is melanin. Human skin tone melanin is either dominant or recessive, indicated here by the A and B. The capital letters are the dominant form and the lowercase letters are the recessive form. So if we set up a Punnett grid here, we can see that coming from both parents, mother and father, we have a capitalized A and a capitalized B from each parent, which gives us a particular format. And as you can see here, as the variations increase, we can have capital A, capital B, lowercase b. We can have capital A, lowercase a, capital B, and we can have uppercase A, lowercase a, and uppercase B and lowercase b, each of them giving a different colour combination for human skin. If we follow this through, we can see that the entirety of the human network of colour combinations amounts to only 16 different colours. And we have here the darkest form is the capital or dominant A's and B's. The mid-range ones are the uppercase A's, lowercase b's, or the uppercase B's and lowercase a's. And if you have lowercase a's and b's, then you have the lightest skin shade. Humans also use brown extensively as a signature of good quality food. It's considered to be natural, so we have seeds, bark, roots, fruit, and nuts, or we can process it, as in refined or heavily processed foods. We also use brown in our environment, such as in our clothing. And the fifth favourite type of dress for humans is brown clothing, whereas boots are the first favourite in the colour brown. These tend to suggest ideas of sophistication, elegance, and warmth, as well as timelessness. Jewellery is a rare favourite, but it generally is associated with natural and grounding feel. But then we also have textiles, we have furniture and furnishings with a versatile backdrop for bedrooms and living rooms. Bedrooms in brown are a second favourite for most people, whereas living rooms are a fourth favourite. And we also use them for food containers to indicate nourishment, as well as disposability, biodegradability. But our use of brown doesn't end there. We also have it as a symbol. In Western cultures, brown is essentially earthy. It's stable, dependable, wholesome, solid, long-lasting, healthy, and it can also indicate barrenness, depending on the individual. In Eastern cultures and in India, it is the colour of mourning. For Latin America, it's an unappealing, lifeless, and disapproving colour. In the Middle East, it's all about harmony, comfort, earth, fertility, and heritage. Whereas for the Native Americans, it's a sacred colour. It indicates healing, strength, and nature's power. In Africa, it's all about the connection to the land. So it's about strength and resilience and the ability to endure adversity. In religion too, brown plays a part. For the Christians, the first indication of brown came in the Bible story of the creation of the world, which was followed shortly after that by the banishing from Eden, which indicated that brown was now all about humanity. And then compassion and acceptance came from Jacob's wish to have a son. And then later on, Noah's Ark showed brown as a colour of salvation. as well as the crucifixion, also indicating that same idea. For Hindus and Buddhists, brown is about grounding, stability, humility, poverty, simplicity, and also spiritual growth. In Wicca, it's all about endurance, solidarity, grounding, and strength. Cultural practices too use the colour brown, but we must remember that these superstitions and practices are not universal. For example, in Chinese horoscopes, the earth element is given the colour brown as the dark brown, whereas wood is a pale brown. Feng Shui shows a way of dealing with different types of environments under these particular Chinese practices. In agriculture and farming, brown clothing tends to suggest a good harvest, as do brown tools. And of course, the horseshoe nailed to a piece of wood is an indicator of good luck. Pets, especially brown dogs, are an indicator also of wealth and happiness, and eggs that are brown are considered to be more nutritious. There is some scientific evidence that suggests this is probably more than just a superstition. In decor, the idea of brown is all about stability, grounding, solidarity, and it seems to be welcoming and comfortable. Personal objects such as brown wallets are considered to be more indicative of wealth than are any other colour. And gemstones can also be seen to have some form of protective element. So security and protection from uncertainty are associated with the tiger's eye, smoky quartz and jasper, whereas the ability to aid mental processes such as health, intuition and spirituality are associated with the gemstones tourmaline, topaz and diaspore. Brown has some physical effects that have been noted. It is a tryptophan enhancer, in which tryptophan also then creates, through a particular process of metabolism, the neurohormone serotonin, which in turn then is transformed into melanin. Looking firstly at the tryptophan, it enhances sleep quality and also helps to support our immune system. Serotonin levels are essential for mood regulation, and they tend to invoke a warm, soothing feeling that stabilizes and brings you back down to earth again. And all of this also supports melatonin production. This provides a feeling of good health, which regulates diurnal variations, just as sunlight, which is also essential for melatonin production, will do for you. And as well as that, brown tends to stimulate appetite. And brown noise is considered to be highly relaxing, and it gives us a steady auditory environment that blocks out intrusive noise and increases the ability to concentrate. The psychological effects depend on the intensity of the colour brown itself. Now, dark, rich browns are associated largely with positive emotions. So there is affection and closeness and attachment, and for some cultures, sophistication, wealth, and resourcefulness. A medium brown is dependent on the context. It can be one that indicates strength, reliability, resilience, and safety. It can also give an impression of timelessness, stability, and conventionality. But it also is insular, unimaginative, and associated with poverty. And finally, we have the light, diffuse browns, which in some contexts are associated with positive emotions, but for most people, it is largely negative. So it has to do with boredom and dullness and predictability and disgust and rejection of things, and also sadness, emptiness, and isolation. Now, all of this brings us to the various images we have of brown in our language. They can be positive and they can be negative. And sometimes, depending on the context, the positive ones can be considered to be negative and the negative ones can be considered positive, which is part of the indication of how complex the ideas of the colour brown are. So here are some of the positive ones: earthiness, simplicity, appreciation, warmth, protection, comfort, groundedness, wisdom, and honesty. Whereas the negative ones are all boredom, dullness, timidity, predictability, death, decay, loneliness, emptiness, and isolation. Which brings us to some of the idioms that we have for the colour brown. Firstly, there is to brown nose. This is a grossly obsequious action. Brown bagging means to bring your own packed lunch to work. A brownout is a drop in electrical power supply. A brownstone is a reddish-brown sandstone building. In a brown study is someone who is absorbed in their own thoughts. Brownie points are the accumulation of credit for doing good deeds. Brown as a berry has to do with being deeply suntanned, whether that is artificially suntanned or it is suntanned from exposure to sunlight itself. Brownfields are abandoned and generally contaminated facilities. So in summary, brown is a very complex colour. Its development as a basic colour term derived from its associations with various aspects of the normal natural environment. It was first used in art, but more recently it has become a symbol. Its cultural uses range from the religious to the aesthetic, and the effects of brown on humans depend on perception and experience, as well as actual physical and psychological effects. And that brings us to the end of the colour brown. As I said at the beginning, there is an awful lot of information available, and if you really want to have a look at some of it, then just simply Google the colour brown and you will be fascinated for hours and hours and possibly even days just going through all of the information that's out there. I hope you've enjoyed this little foray into the colour brown. I'll be dealing with brown as a personality type in a few weeks, but I also want to look at this new information that I came across just recently in my readings, in which I want to challenge some of the assumptions that were made by the authors. And I have some support for those challenges as well. In the meantime, if you are one of those rare people who really like brown as a colour in your life, then I wish you wealth and success and happiness, because remember, brown contains all of the primaries and all of the secondaries. It's just the mixture that makes each brown different. Until next time, may colour fill your life and bring you all of the things that you desire.